Well, Mr. Jolly, thank you so much for your time.
It's good to be with you.
Let's start with the big one, the rising cost of living. What specifically, as governor, would you do to try to bring down the cost of home insurance and more generally the cost of finding anywhere to live?
I'm running for governor for the singular issue of the affordability crisis that is a lived experience for our family, for families and people across the state of Florida that I think arguably Tallahassee Republicans have contributed to, don't have a plan to get us out of, and I want to. So how do we do that? The number one driver of the affordability crisis is housing, access to housing. I think we need bold, dramatic property insurance reform. We need a state catastrophic fund to remove hurricane coverage out of the private market. You could cut private insurance by about 60%.
But we have a CAT fund. Why not just use that, lower the attachment point so that you can have insurance companies buy more into it and work it that way?
So we have a hurricane fund in the state of Florida that's basically a reinsurance fund. I'm talking about fully removing natural disaster perils from the private market, funding a state catastrophic fund. Look, the private insurance market has collapsed in the state of Florida. It's not coming back. Republicans are tinkering around the edges. They are bringing in undercapitalized firms, and as we've just seen, they're allowing insurance companies to send their profits out of state and keep the losses here. They're doing that to try to stabilize a market that cannot be stabilized. We have to recognize when private markets fail, government has to step in. We do it in healthcare, right? We have Medicare and Medicaid and other programs because the healthcare market is just too expensive for many people. But we have to think about that in property insurance as well. I know, look, I introduced a national CAT fund in Congress to do wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes. My Republican colleagues then called it socialism. I don't care what you call it. If we're giving property insurance relief to homeowners, we need to do it. And I think we need property tax relief as well.
You also have the Live Local Act, which, among other things, gives tax breaks and incentives and subsidies to landlords who can turn around and charge market rate rent or even higher than market rate rent. How did that even happen, and what would you do about that?
Because our values in Tallahassee are, I think, out of sync with most Floridians, let's look at a different opportunity we have to address housing in communities. Workforce housing. Right now, tourist and development tax dollars are used to build big convention centers, big tourist facilities. Why don't we use some of those tax dollars to build workforce housing for people who work in the convention centers? That's just math, but it's also a reflection of values. We can block grant more money from Tallahassee to communities for affordable housing. There are ways that this works. It works across the country. We aren't doing that in Florida, I believe, because Republicans favor development. They are fine with cutting down fields, building houses, but we run out of water and we overcrowd our schools. That's just a giveaway to industry too often.
Would you repeal the 2022 insurance reforms that make it harder and financially riskier to sue insurance companies over claims disputes?
Look, I am somebody who actually thinks we should unleash the courtrooms and juries and allow people to petition and sue insurance companies and other corporations, because that's the way you address claims. This is also, it's a perfect example though, Craig. Republicans are trying to fix the insurance problem with all the wrong answers.
You say you want to end the clashes in Tallahassee, the culture wars, find ways that we can work together, lower the temperature.
Yeah.
But isn't that a perfect way to get ignored on social media, to have the algorithm suppress your message so that most of the people you might need to get elected would not hear or see your message?
You've been around long enough to know how Bob Graham ran a campaign, Lawton Chiles ran a campaign. In this environment, in a Republican superstate, where Republicans will outraise and outspend us 2-1, the only way to win an election, to build a true coalition of change, is to go into communities where we haven't been in a long time, and to show that we can build trust and build coalition, listen to each other, and actually realize that maybe we should put change ahead of our partisan affiliation.
When you were a Republican in Congress, you lost your seat, mostly, I would say, because the district was redrawn to include more Democrats than Republicans.
Yeah.
You know that firsthand, that that's a daunting challenge when there are more voters in the other party. How then could you expect to win a race as a Democrat in a state where there are now many more Republicans than Democrats, when they barely or seldom won when there were many more Democrats than Republicans?
So I've been out of politics long enough to tell the truth. Your question is exactly right. Let's be honest about how a coalition, not just a candidate, a coalition wins and creates change in November 26. We need the environment to meet us halfway. We are experiencing a national change environment right now, maybe a generational change election. Your choice is Byron Donalds, who is Donald Trump's handpicked person, or Casey DeSantis. Do I want more of the same? Do I want to continue with the affordability crisis with no real solutions? Am I okay abandoning public schools? Am I okay with culture wars that divide us? Or do I actually want a government that fixes my problems? I love that environment. I don't care about people's voter registration. I don't think they do either, if that's the environment next November.
In Trump's first term, you said that it was an embarrassing time to be a Republican for you, but you still believed in Republican center-right principles when it comes to the economy, when it comes to regulations, when it comes to healthcare. Do you still have center-right beliefs on policies including taxation, healthcare, and regulations?
In some areas I do. I'm for lower corporate taxes because I think it leads to greater economic growth. But I'm for more gun safety legislation because I think that reduces violence in our state. That's a change for me, right? When I got into politics, I wrongly conflated my religious teachings and my faith teachings to where I was against Roe v. Wade and against the Casey First Planned Parenthood judicial framework. Now, I think you could see my journey. I actually was the only Republican at the time to vote against the Planned Parenthood investigation. I tried to save money for reproductive care, but I wasn't there yet on defending Roe. But I am now. That's been part of my journey, particularly in the darker chapters after the Dobbs decision. Here's the most important thing, though. And I love this conversation for this reason. I want this to be a part of the campaign. I want my journey to be a part of the campaign. Critics will reflexively say, he changed his mind. I did. I test that question in politics. Is it okay to change your mind? And you know what? The answer is yes, because most voters have. You know who's changed the most? Republicans. Republicans who used to be for less government, for lower taxes, for fiscal responsibility, now are defending more deficits and more debt. Republicans in Tallahassee are defending walking into your doctor's offices and your classrooms and your bedrooms. They've changed. They've certainly changed. So let them defend their change and I'll defend mine, and I feel really good about that.
What has your journey on healthcare been? Because when you first ran and won a seat in Congress, you said that Obamacare was a disaster, that it was wreaking havoc on small business. Have you changed your position on the Affordable Care Act?
I was running during the rollout of Obamacare, and if Democrats are honest about that, the rollout was havoc. The uncertainty in the markets were real. President Obama had said, if you like your doctor, you can keep it, or your plan, or whatever, and that wasn't actually true. PolitiFact rated that, I think, the biggest lie of the year, right? There were problems with the initial rollout of Obamacare. But what I'll tell you is the Affordable Care Act ultimately did provide health care to more people, and Medicaid expansion is a good thing, and Florida should accept Medicaid expansion. This is very similar to property insurance. And, you know, I like to kind of live in a post-ideological space now. That's been part of my journey. I actually think there's a role for government to step in where private markets have failed.
The last time we spoke, I think it was around 2018, you said you just didn't feel as if you had a home in the Democratic Party.
That's true.
What has changed since 2018?
The Democratic Party was fighting over who could be more progressive, more moderate, whatever that was. That's not this environment. If you go back to Vice President Harris's Democratic National Convention last summer, they invited in people of faith. They invited in veterans. They invited in independents. They invited in some Republicans to speak at the convention. Democrats showed they wanted to build a coalition that was big enough and broad enough for everyone. You know, James Carville and I used to have a conversation. He said, Jolly, you're trying to organize the independent movement, but you're taking votes from Democrats. And I said, James, those voters are available to you too. When I was an independent, I would beg the major parties. I said, look, we're available. Speak to us. Bring us in. Let's talk about shared values. They wouldn't. I think the Democratic Party is doing better, but we need to do even more. And if I lead a Democratic Party in the state of Florida, it is going to be a party that brings in the independent movement and says, our values better align with yours than I believe today's Republican Party does.
Well, on that point, when you considered a statewide run a few years ago, you suggested a unity ticket in which a Republican and Democrat would run together. If you get the Democratic nomination, would you be open to, or would you pick, or might you pick a Republican as your running mate?
I don't think it's legal under the law. Part of what Patrick Murphy and I planned to do when we had our unity ticket was we expected to get sued by the major parties. But what the parties have done, particularly the Republican Party in Tallahassee, is they have created barriers to the ballot and barriers to direct democracy that have impacted voters and candidates alike. My reading of the statute suggests if any candidate picks someone of another party, not only is the LG disqualified, but the gubernatorial candidate is as well, and that happens after the primary with no recourse to recover. Look, I think there's incredible talent in today's Democratic Party. I would be excited about picking a Democrat. Maybe it's a legislator, but you know what it might be? It might be a big city police chief. who understands how to police their community and wants Tallahassee to stay out of it, who understands how to reduce crime in a community, who recognizes the racial and immigrant disparities in criminal justice and tries to fix those while they're keeping safe communities.
Oh, how about a specific example of a law enforcement leader who comes to mind? Could be a good running mate.
I'm not sure I should say that, but it could be a police chief, it could be a major county sheriff, it could be somebody that understands this is critical, this is really important. I think Republicans have gotten away too long with fighting communities and not crime. I want us to be a Democratic Party that fights crime and not communities.
According to the NAA, Florida ranks 50th in the nation in average teacher pay. At the same time, schools are offering fewer classes, more teachers are teaching out of their fields, fewer are completing programs to become teachers. At the same time, the test scores in the later years continue to slide. What's causing that, and is it solely an issue with teacher pay, and how do you address the challenges in public education?
Republicans are causing that. Republicans have abandoned public education. It's a moral wrong, but it's also bad policy. We need to reinvest and celebrate public education. Florida should have the best public education system in the world. Our public schools should be a place where families want to go ahead of going to a private school. If we do that, school choice becomes a real choice. It's a false choice right now under the Republican plan. We have excellence in public education right now. Still, the greatest access to academic excellence, to the trades, to the arts, to the sciences exists in our public schools, but only out of the sheer will, talent, and determination of our teachers and administrators, because they're keeping it going despite the fact that they're underfunded. They deserve to be lifted up. I think we need a 30% pay raise, not a 3%. But let's attack just a minute the school choice voucher program that Republicans have created, because the economics there are collapsing. When they went to universal vouchers, it no longer was about families in need. 70% of families that received vouchers in the first year under universal vouchers were already in private schools. They didn't need the additional financial need. Then the vouchers come in and the school raises tuition. And families say, wait a minute, I just got a voucher, but now I also got a bill for $5,000 or $10,000. But the most important thing is that our voucher schools don't have to provide the same services as our public schools. If your first grader can't read, the private voucher school gets to kick them out. Go back to a public school where they get an IEP. Why not require our private voucher schools to provide the same services that our public schools do? Now, this also makes me a little bit of a different Democrat. I'm not for ending the voucher program, but we need to means test it and put rules and requirements on private schools that are on public schools if they're receiving state money. Let's view public and private educators as partners of Florida's families and say, if you're going to educate our kids with public money, then you're going to abide by the same rules.
As we try to relieve congestion on our roads, the state is adding more express lanes, toll lanes onto existing roads that our taxes have already paid to build and maintain. There's class discrimination because one who is wealthier can more easily pay the tolls.
That's exactly
Do you
right.
support adding more toll lanes to existing roads, or do you have a different solution to freeing up traffic?
More money into infrastructure for everybody, Now look, there are places where toll roads might make sense because it relieves congestion in specific communities without increasing wealth disparity. But the notion in some of our biggest metro areas, we have housing where workers have to live an hour and a half outside of where they work, and now they have to sit in traffic where the wealthiest get to cruise down open HOV lanes or pay lanes. That's just wrong. And look, I think budgets are values. How we spend our money create values, or at least reflect values. My concern, and I don't mean this as a cheap shot. This is a lived experience, right? In Florida, we remember how Florida used to be. We're seeing the direction it's going. I'm afraid under Republican economic policy in Florida, Florida's becoming a home for the rich and the reckless. And we need values that make a home for everybody. That's not to say there's no place for toll roads, but they are hiding the fiscal cliff we're in by requiring highways to be tolled, because we don't have sufficient revenue and resources to pay for new infrastructure that's actually needed for everybody, not just for the wealthy. We don't have to beat up success or beat up the wealthy, but we've got to recognize when there is an income and wealth disparity that is growing worse by the year, we should be trying to fix that.
There is a wait list for people with developmental disabilities to get home-based services. It's more than 20,000 people on the list, 21,000 people on the list. When Jeb Bush ran for governor, he promised to get rid of the wait list, and he did. Then it reformed later. If you're governor, or as a candidate running for governor, would you promise to get rid of the wait list once again?
I would. Budgets are values. Now, can we do that on day one? Probably not, because of the hole that Republicans have dug for us. But budgets are values. When we talk about Medicaid expansion, for instance, Medicaid covers, I think, over 40% of childbirth services. Medicaid funds a lot of people in their final days in long-term care because they have no more resources, and it provides for the elderly and the sick. Medicaid provides an enormous portfolio of services for those with unique abilities and special abilities. And yet Republicans are rolling back Medicaid services, and Ron DeSantis doesn't want to expand it in the state of Florida. If there is federal money to serve our communities, if there's ability to get people off of wait lists, we should be doing that as a government, not because it's good policy, but it's the right thing to do.
Let's close on the environment. We have a toxic algae problem in Florida. Would you support additional restrictions on fertilizer?
Yes.
What more would you do to address the problem?
Smart growth, controlled growth. We have a responsibility to be stewards of the environment, first and foremost, right? But then we have to control growth, and you know what we have to do? Put in charge of the water districts people who are going to protect clean water and clean air, and not just giveaways to developers. Smart managed growth is an answer that we failed on.
Would you then move to restore the Ocklawaha River from all the damage that was done from the Cross Florida Barge Canal through the decades?
We must. That is only one major example. Clean water is a responsibility, but it also supports the economic growth. We have an environmental economy. We have an ocean economy here in the state of Florida. We have not been stewards of our environment like we should. We need to, because it's right, but it supports the quality of life and an economy in the state of Florida.
Mr. Jolly, thank you again.
Good to be with you, Greg.